So, David, just for the point of documenting it, could you give us a synopsis of your origin story with a voice, and especially how you came to work at Two Eagle River School?
Sure. It kind of goes back to New York, so I don't know if I'm going back too far. I worked in New York City for the International Center of Photography, which at the time was on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It was an old one-family mansion built by Dorothy Whitney and Willard Straight, and ICP moved into there in the late 1970s. I traveled back there to do an internship, a museum studies program, and became very interested while I was there. I actually ended up living in the building. Cornell Kappa, who was my boss, Robert Kappa was his older brother, who was the famous war photographer from World War II. And Cornell's function, what he saw his job was to collect photographs of war photographers who were getting killed on assignment, and felt that if we had these pictures to show people when they start wars, that maybe there would be a better reference for, maybe it would be a better way to deal with that kind of idea. So I moved into the building in January of 1980 and was there for 18 and a half years. And it was this kind of learning curve, and they asked me to start teaching, and I coordinated their darkroom programs. And there was at a point where he came up to me and said, one day, he said, it became his photographer. I was the house photographer, so I was photographing handshaking and smiling pictures at openings, which he would use to fundraise with, and I was copying important photographs that they would reproduce in the New York Times for reviews of different photo shows. And he said to me one day, well, we're a new museum, and maybe there's something that you can do here that we haven't done before, and you could maybe leave a legacy. And I sort of thought, well, that's kind of being thrown a lot of stuff in my lap. But at the same time, it was interesting, within that week, I walked to the corner of 96th Street and Madison Avenue and looked into East Harlem. And I thought about the idea of, wouldn't it be cool? And one of the things I had read in the mission of ICP was that they wanted to reach out to a community that they normally wouldn't have access to or wouldn't normally have connection to. So as I'm looking at East Harlem that day, I said, well, this is the community. And at the same time, there was a woman teaching history at CLC, which is a creative learning community, which was 10 blocks north of there. So ICP was in the very old, rich, white money area, and East Harlem was one of the poorest neighborhoods in the community, and she was thinking, well, maybe we should hook up with that photography museum and do some programming. So we got together and we developed a program, and it was called Our Community Record, which I stole and used for this program here. And it turned out that we were in East Harlem, and we did a program, and we were there for 11 years. And the second year we were in the program, NYSCA, which was the New York State Council of Arts, approached us and said, well, we're having such a strong response to your program, can you go somewhere else in the city as well? So we went to the Lower East Side, and we developed a program at Seward Park High School. And the year I left the programs, I was there for 11 years doing what essentially became ICP's community outreach program. I was teaching 7 classes a week in 5 different schools around the city, and all in places that wouldn't necessarily have access to photography. When my wife, Jill, and I were in New York, and we were trying to decide whether we wanted to grow old in New York or not, she made the suggestion, maybe you want to go out to, maybe we can go out to Montana and do some programming out here, because I went to Polson High School and they didn't have anything like that where I went to school. So I said, okay. So in 1999, I came out here and did a summer program with the brand new Boys and Girls Club, which is in Ronan. And I worked with Mark Gibbons, the poet, and we actually did a 2-week summer program up here and had kids writing and photographing. And it was at that point that I sort of said, I think I'd like to go to Montana. So I actually waited, Jill moved out here 2 years before I did to the house that I described earlier, and kind of got it set up. And I was nervous about leaving, because leaving a paid position in a museum that sort of, whenever I wanted to do a new program, I would just walk up to the grants office and work with the foundation people and they say, David, what do you want to do? And I say, I want to go here and do this, and they would write the grants for us. So the idea that I would have to write our grants and have to manage the whole thing was a little bit scary and daunting. But I came out here in 2000, and interestingly met Jennifer Finley, who was the editor and publisher of Charcusta, the tribal newspaper. And the reason someone told me to go see her was that I had gotten Arts Council money to do a summer program, and we did that summer. In 2001, we went to every reservation community, did a free 1-week workshop. And they said, go see Jennifer because she could help you recruit. And so I walked in and met Jennifer, and we've been able to do collaborations ever since then that are the combination of writing and doing all that. So as I said earlier, I walked into Two Eagle in 1999 in the fall. I made the pitch. They said, come on in. And by January that year, following year, I really decided I wanted to do a program. And so I approached the Arts Council. I went back to some funding sources that we had been successful with in New York and kind of pitched them all. And they said, well, you need to have a nonprofit. So after a couple of years in the program and realizing that it was difficult to raise grants through other institutions, essentially, Jill and I decided to start A Voice. And I don't know if you were familiar with Jennifer Blumberg. So Jennifer Blumberg was actually, at the time, was hired by the Arts Council as an advisor. And she would actually advise people on whether they should start a nonprofit or not. So we learned about her through the Arts Council, and she came and met with us. And she said to us, well, tell us what you want to do. And we told her what we wanted to do. And she said, well, 99% of the people who I go to advise on nonprofits, I tell them don't do it because that's not what you should be doing. She said, but you should go for it.
Good.
So that was our start. And so we essentially reached out to friends of ours. I had a friend who was an attorney. I had a friend who was involved in college education and academic institution stuff. And we actually formed a board. And we told our friends, we don't want you to give us any money. We just want to be able to have this so we can raise grant money. So in 2006, in the spring, we started that. And so the Two Eagle program has been funded through A Voice since that time. And we have new board members this year. We've got some of our old friends are still there. Jennifer came on our board for a period of time and then left, but she's still a consultant for us. And we have Two Eagle program, the one that the Arts and School program that Max supports, has been really what A Voice was built around. We wanted to have a program that we would go back to year after year. We wanted to have the impact of not just the program going in once and leaving. And so we wanted to build it for a period of time, which we found in New York was successful. If we could get back to community school and spend a few years there, it made a big difference in terms of what we could achieve in terms of learning and arts participation stuff. So Two Eagle has been the focus of it, but we also, since then, have been asked to do different things, and there have been different ideas that we've come up with since then that are community-based, that are reactions to or responses to things that we feel programming might have an effect on here. So.
Excellent. Specifically, regarding the Artists in Schools and Communities grant program, can you just briefly talk about the kinds of things that grant has allowed you to do that you might not be able to do otherwise, either through funding or programming or what have you?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, when you're applying for a grant, you're kind of putting onto paper who you are and what you're about, and it's sort of this descriptive kind of process that in a lot of ways it's hard to convey the actual experience in the classroom to that kind of, how do you answer those questions? We've been in a really privileged position of being able to watch every day. We can watch things occur. And so what that program has allowed us to do is, in all the years that we've been able to operate, what that program has allowed us to do is to be there and to watch and to just support the idea of creativity. I mean, we put cameras in young people's hands. We walk them through the process. What's incredibly empowering about the process is that what students learn and realize, or learn very quickly, is that they have to go through certain steps in order to be successful at it. So if you take step one and you ignore step two, it doesn't work. And so by being there and going back day after day, week after week, and year after year in our case, what we're able to see and what the funding of that program has allowed us to do is to be a constant. Okay? And many of the young people that we work with don't have other constants in their life. I learned a long time ago in New York that if I told our students that we needed to be there on Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock, that I needed to be there. And whether I had funding or not, I would be there. And so the process of the program at the Arts Council in supporting us in this way every year allows us to be in that position, but also allows us to. I always have to explain that my wife, who is an associate director, is our bookkeeper, and she's very practical. I'm always sort of like walking in and saying, I want to go do this and I want to go do that, and she is the first person to ask me, how are you going to pay for it? And so what the program is, what your program has done, what MAC program has done, is allowed us to pay for it. It's allowed us to be there. And it's also an incredibly important mark, the fact that we have been funded each year, the fact that we've received 3 NEA grants for the program, not only means that we are getting funding, but it also means that our program is on a competitive level with programs around the country and programs around in different communities, and that's really huge for us. Again, what the Arts Council people don't know is how much of a family you are to us, because we know that if we don't have, we know how hard that people in the Arts Council world work, and the National Endowment for the Arts people work really hard to get things to us that allow us to do what we do. And so I've never been able to sort of quantify that in writing, the idea that you're being there for us and anyone being there for us means that we can be there for other people. And so that's something that's hard to quantify, hard to describe, but it's really true. When I go into that classroom every day, I'm not just taking a bunch of cameras, or I'm not just taking some ideas about sharing with students. What I'm taking is institutions like the Arts Council and institutions like the NEA into the classroom with us, because we're all part of this thing. And photography is this great thing. It can be this big band leading thing, and we can talk about how great photography is, but it really isn't the same thing without the community that's behind it. And so this program is really a community behind us.
Thank you for that, David. If you had occasion to give some words of encouragement to someone considering writing their very first Artists in Schools and Communities grant, what might you tell them from the standpoint that, sometimes it feels daunting writing a grant, any grant for the first time. But if you have any thoughts about how to sort of jump in to the process, or how to approach the process in the best way, what might you tell them?
I would say just write from your heart. If you're deciding to write a grant, obviously you have an idea about wanting funding to do something that you feel and care about. And so I care about this a lot. I care about the people who we serve. I care about the process. I care about what occurs in it. I was a high school student in my bottom quarter of my class, graduating class, and I took photography at that time, mainly because I wanted the credits, and I also wanted to take photography so I could get out of class and not have to sit there in class. And it turned out that I had an art teacher who was incredibly supportive and who gave me the beginning tools to be able to say, you can do this. And so the reason I'm here and the reason I do what I do is that I understand what it feels like to be in an academic setting and feel a little bit intimidated, feeling like because I was quiet, that my teachers might not know who I was or didn't really think that I was responding, when in fact I was really taking everything in, but I didn't necessarily know how to quantify that or verbalize that. So when you're writing a grant, it's the same thing. I mean, don't worry about what you're not writing. Worry about what you care about. You know, write about what is important to you. Write about the people that you want to reach out to. Because in the case of us, I always write from that context about, okay, this is how I feel. This is the community I'm serving. And luckily with photography, I think it's really important, in addition to rewriting it, is to show some kind of evidence of what you have. And luckily, photographs are incredible evidence. If you're a writer and you want to do a writing program, send some writing, along with your proposal. If you're in any other art form, send stuff that you're thinking about. And if it's the first time you're there and you're saying, well, I don't really have this kind of stuff available to me, go out and send the stuff that you respond to, that you're planning to do. So whether you would steal a picture of a famous artist or sculptor or writer or whatever else, say, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to present. This is how I want to go about doing it. And don't worry about how many words you need to write. Write the words that are important to you, and then write the words that are direct and are going to get your idea across. And don't be afraid to do it. I'm not a writer, but luckily Jill cleans up my writing when I kind of get going. But don't be afraid to share it with someone, and have someone write it and say, and it doesn't even have to be someone specializing in the arts. Have someone read it and say, what am I missing? How does that feel? Do you understand what I'm saying here? And then use that reference to kind of go on and build on what you have.
Great. Thank you so much, David.
Well,
I really appreciate the chance to hear more of the story every time I hear something I didn't know. So they're like puzzle pieces.
All right. Well,
thank you so much.
I'm a puzzle.
Did you have a question that has come to mind at all?
I don't know. I mean, the Getty thing.
Oh, right. Oh,
maybe
thank you.
That might be worth talking.
Oh, yeah. We should capture that on, yeah.
Can I get up?
Yes.
If you want to hand me that paper, and I'll proudly.
Yes.
Yeah, either one of them is the same.
Thanks for that.
So this is Katie,
Okay.
and Katie is our most recent. I don't want to say each young photographer is important to us, but she's someone who has just recently been recognized for her work. So Katie's story essentially was that she moved to this area about 1.5 years ago with her family, and she came into Two Eagle in the fall, and it was the first time at the school. She had gone to Ronan for a year and wasn't too happy there, and decided she was going to do that. And it turns out that she came into our photography class. We were all in masks at that point, so we couldn't really see each other's faces for a long time, and I didn't see her face actually till spring this year. But she would come in and she would be very quiet, but was listening all the time. It kind of reminded me of myself in the sense that I knew that she was taking it in. And the way I really knew it was that she would take a camera home on the weekends and come back, and she had all these pictures that she was really enamored with. Literally the first day we went out and photographed, it was a day of fog that had settled over the whole community here. We walked outside, and she took these pictures of the garden with the fog kind of draped over the plants that were dying at that point because of the temperature change. And we went back in, and I was looking at it, and there was this one that I had looked at. It was like, it reminded me of a painting. And what I didn't know much about her at that point, but when later on I learned from her mother that she really liked painting and that she was really creative and doing all this stuff, and it made perfect sense. In January, I learned about a call, a national call for high school photographers, and I was thinking about, well, who in my classes would I present the idea of maybe having them enter a piece or two. Actually, we were able to enter 7 pieces. And she was really working at that time, and I had her for a whole term during the fall, and I said, maybe Katie might be interested. So I sat down with her after class, and I said, what would you think about entering this competition? And she said, and I kind of laid it out and told them, what it was about, told her what it was about. And she said, well, let me think about it. She went home for the weekend and came back, and she said, I think I want to do it. So we sat down in front of the computer, and there was a little Vimeo that was on the website of the people who were sponsoring this particular competition. And we looked at the Vimeo, and I said to her, what do you think? And she said, I think I'd like to do it. And I said, but it looks like they want you to do portraits for this particular theme this year. And so she said, well, I've never done a portrait before. And I said, well, who could you portray? She said, well, let me think about it. I said, well, you could portray your family. What about your mom and your sister? And what do you think? He said, oh, let me think. And I said, well, where do you live? She told me she lived in Pishi, which is the tribal housing unit here in Ronan. And I said, there are lots of kids there, right? And she said, yeah. I said, well, maybe you could photograph the kids. She said, okay, well, let's try it. So I sent her home with the camera the first weekend, and she came back, and as soon as she walked in class, I said, portraits? And she said, not yet. Came in the second weekend, I said, portraits? No. Came in the third weekend, and she still hadn't done any portraits. And the issue was that we had a 6-week, we had to have the work in within 6 weeks of when we first made had our first conversation. So it's funny, the fourth week she came in, and I didn't even ask. I just was sort of thinking maybe it's slipping by, and she said, I've got portraits. So I said, well, let's look at them. And so she had actually, in the interim, had photographed one of the tribal elders at the school, and had photographed someone that, when we were out on one of our shoots, had just taken someone over here at the college. And she had 2 of them, but she wasn't, I could tell that she wasn't totally thrilled with them. But I said, who did you portray? And she said, my sister. And I said, oh, tell me more. And this is before we looked at the picture. She said, I gave my sister my old dancing dress, and she and my mom and I went up to the dam up by the mountains there, and I did a series of photographs of her there. And I said, well, let's look at them. So we went through them, and there were these wonderful pictures of her, just in the landscape and, different poses and different kinds of things. And I said, okay, I think we have something. So we sat down, and we had to edit down to 7 images. So she sent the 2 pictures that she had done previously, and she picked out 5 pictures of her sister that she entered in the program. And so the day before the deadline, we actually loaded the pictures up and sent them off to the site that accepted them. And it was sort of one of those things that, if nothing else, the process of her actually doing it was I was totally comfortable with. So about 2 weeks went by, and I'm out with my students in class over here at the college photographing, and I see Katie walking towards me, and I see a woman behind her who I figured out was her mom because the coat she was wearing was the same coat that was in one of her photographs that he had edited. And I said, you must be Mom. And she said, yeah. And Katie said, guess what? We won. I said, what? She said, and I had kind of put it out of my mind, saying that what we had done getting her into the competition was really what it was about, She said, we won. She said, they just called me, and they said, I have to send my releases, and I have to send the original image back to a certain size by tomorrow. And I said, okay. So we went back, and I spent 3 hours with her and her mom, sitting there and signing releases and getting the image ready, and finally sending it off to the people there. And what was amazing about it was that she and her mother was just tickled. She said, we just moved here, and we had to leave a situation that wasn't the greatest when we left, and all of a sudden these wonderful things are happening for Katie. And so that was essentially the story. And since then, she's had 3 pieces written about us. We had our local Valley Journal newspaper write about it. We had the tribal newspaper Charcusta write about it, and then the Missoulian, which I just flashed to you.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, it's put her in a trajectory that has changed her life no matter what happens. The picture I was mentioning was that she picked 4 of them, and then she said, well, let's pick a 5th one. And she picked this one. I said, well, I think you should do this one. And she said, I want to do this one. She was very decisive about her choices, and she was really good at editing. And it was funny because the picture she picked wouldn't have necessarily been the one I picked, but it was the one that won the competition. And she was one of 1,700 students nationwide out of 20 that were there.
Hi, Corky.
And actually, when I sent the article to Corky and talked about Katie, and Corky's response to the image was, he was telling me how he saw everything in that image of who she was as a young person, who she was as an Indigenous person, and who she was as someone who could maybe move into the future. So that's the story of Katie.
Oh, so exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Yeah,
David. We really appreciate all your time and letting us interview you and putting some of this on the record.
Yeah.
And,
Whatever works.
I know you're not used to being on that side.
I'm not used to this being the side of the camera, for
So,
sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
everything you felt here, so.
That's a wrap.